Hello, and welcome to the many lives of Stewart Park, past and present. I'm Janelle Alvstead Matson, Communications Coordinator for Friends of Stewart Park. This presentation is the second in the FSP Centennial series, celebrating 100 years of Stewart Park. FSP is enhancing and revitalizing Stewart Park in partnership with the City of Ithaca for the enjoyment of Ithaca residents and visitors to our community. Later in the program, Andrea Bruns will tell you a little bit more about how you can help in this mission by joining the Mayor Stewart Centennial Challenge. I'd like to first thank our sponsors, Tompkins Trust Company and Hancock Estabrook LLP and La Terrell for helping make these events possible. Now, let me thank Natasha Bratkotsky as our technical coordinator for this event. Natasha joins us from Flair Strategic Communications, a marketing and PR company based in Ithaca that works with small businesses and nonprofits. If you'd like to learn more about her work, feel free to visit www.ithacaflair.com.
So as Janelle said, I will be monitoring this event in its entirety just to make sure that everything runs smoothly. So if you have any technical concerns, feel free to place those in the chat box to the panelists. If you send a message to the panelists, all of us, including myself, will see that even if I do not appear on video. And for those of you who have not joined Zoom webinar, in the past, there are two ways that you can engage in this webinar. The first, again, is that chat box. So if you have any comments throughout the presentation, you may chat with just the speakers or with everyone in attendance. So feel free to use that. The speakers may also post links in the chat box for your reference, so you can keep an eye on that. And then we also have the Q&A box. So if you have any questions related to the presentations, feel free to enter those in the Q&A box, and as many as time permits will be answered likely towards the end of the presentation. And then lastly, just a quick note, currently this is set to gallery side-by-side view, which basically means if you take your cursor over to the divider between the speakers and the presentation, you as an attendee have the ability to toggle the size of each. So if you'd like the presentation to be bigger, you can move that over and vice versa. So please feel free to use that function and enjoy the event.
Thank you, Natasha. So, of course, we are grateful tonight to be joined by our partners in revitalization to talk about the history and present life of Stewart Park. A little bit more about our presenters. Rick Manning is a co-founder of Friends of Stewart Park and has been its executive director since the organization began in 2011. His work as a landscape architect for the Cayuga Waterfront Trail Initiative helped him discover his love of Stewart Park and imagine the possibilities that revitalization of the park could bring. While he's often found at his desk, Rick much prefers to be in the park, riding his bike or cleaning up the gardens and trails for visitors to enjoy. Diana Riesman is a founding board member of Friends of Stewart Park and is the current board president. She's also the co-founder and executive director of the Wharton Studio Museum. Stewart Park was one of the first places that Diana visited on her first trip to Ithaca in 2001. She's thrilled to live here and work on projects that combine her love for the park and the city with her lifelong interest in history and more than a dozen years of experience in the movie business in New York City and LA. While she's often found at her desk, Diana much prefers to be in the park, beating Rick at tennis. Susan Holland has been executive director at Historic Ithaca since 2017 and has worked in the field of preservation and community development for 25 years. This field includes architectural history, and the buildings of Stewart Park have been particularly intriguing to Susan. She also serves as a commissioner for the Erie Canal Heritage Area Commission and as a member of Tompkins County Historical Commission. Bryan McCraken has served as a historic preservation and neighborhood planner for the City of Ithaca and primary staff for Ithaca's Landmarks Preservation Commission since 2014. As a first-year graduate student in Cornell's Historic Preservation Planning Program, Bryan was introduced to the historic architecture in Stewart Park through hands-on window repair and painting workshop Cascadilla Boathouse. This brief experience sparked his love for Stewart Park and motivated him to learn more about the special buildings, structures, and landscapes within it. Finally, before we start, I want to tell you about our next program in the Centennial series, The Boys and Girls in the Boat, Ithaca's Amazing History of Competitive Rowing. For over 25 years, crews have rowed sweep and scull on Cayuga Lake. We'll explore how and why rowing reigns in Ithaca with captivating photos and lively discussion with some of Ithaca's biggest rowing champions. This is one of a host of events that we're planning for this centennial year. You can find out more information and how to register at our website, stewartpark.org/events. And with that, we'll hand it over.
Hello, thank you for inviting me to this exciting event. I get to open the panel to give you information on how people have reshaped the land at the southern tip of Cayuga Lake over centuries to become what we now know as the 21st century modern park, and that's taken right from Friends of Stewart Park's own website. In order to acknowledge the Native American peoples and honor history, we're going to look at the historical record. This map shows the representation of the indigenous people who were on the land in central New York 300 years ago. The label for this map is the Six Nation Territory circa 1720, after the adoption of the Tuscarora by the Oneida. Current day Stewart Park lands are located on the traditional and contemporary homelands of the Guyacona, who are members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy as the alliance of six sovereign nations: Mohawk, Oneida, Tuscarora, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca. In our human history, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy has a historic and contemporary presence on this land and on our historical timeline before any of the white settlements. I want to go a little bit back from further than this map, and I would suggest that you do go to the Friends website. We'll show you some resources at the end of our presentation, but about the cultural history of the waterfront, an overview which goes into much further detail. The presence of Cayuga Nation here is estimated around 1300 BC, with the Confederacy forming sometime between 1400 and 1600 AD to have 5 of the 6 nations form a peace council and to end their intertribal warfare. By the 1700s, the Tuscarora had joined as the 6th nation. So what you see here is the website for the Cayuga Nation on this slide here. And there's much more to learn about their matrilineal culture and food systems such as agriculture. At the southern corner of Cayuga Lake, named Hogs Hole, was an excellent eel fishing site where Cayugas camped. Sources conflict about the Cayuga settlements. Certainly often used campsites were there and close to the waterfront. Some of the written evidence is from the Sullivan campaign, which indicates that a few Native American buildings along the inlet were destroyed. I know this is probably repetitive for a lot of you who are interested in history and the history of central New York. The Sullivan Clinton campaign occurred in the summer of 1779. I was surprised myself to find out that it was General George Washington who ordered the campaign, with the belief that the Native Americans in central New York had sided with the British in the American Revolution. He said the necessity of pushing the Indians to the greatest practical distance from their own settlements in our frontier throwing them wholly on the British mercy, and that it was a brutal removal of Native American peoples here, with 40 villages burned, numerous individual sites, and 160 acres of crops destroyed. There is evidence to point at the fact that the people of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy left their villages and sites before Sullivan and his minions arrived, but it is estimated that many people perished. After the American Revolutionary War, central New York was divided up into military tracts in 1790, and our former Haudenosaunee territories were divided into 28 townships and further subdivided into military tracts of 600-acre parcels each. And they were payment to the soldiers who fought in the Revolutionary War. This map is from an original by Simeon DeWitt, who I'm sure many of you have heard of. He was the state surveyor at the time and ended up amassing many military tracts to form what we now know as Ithaca. Ultimately, soldier Andrew Moody sold his land parcel at the southeastern shore of the lake to James Renwick. And now I'm going to hand it over to Rick.
Thank you, Susan, and welcome everyone. We're so glad you could join us tonight. So this is an 1830s image, a Wharton painting from the west side, and it just shows an image of what became Renwick and then Stewart Park. But you can see the sort of cattail marsh on the edge of the lake and the swamp forest behind it to the right, just above the smoking chimney. And it's important to note here the steamboat carrying a barge, perhaps full of salt or other agricultural products. So there was already an impact of the Erie Canal. We are, as you all know, part of the barge canal, the New York State Canal system, and it had an impact even in the 1830s, and it did open in 1825. Another form of water recreation or transportation, I guess, had a big impact on Stewart Park and was kind of formative in the building selection. And they used to have rowing races, and we'll learn a lot more about the amazing history of rowing next month. But I just wanted to show you this image at the south end of Cayuga Lake of folks looking from the east shore, from the rail cars that I'll show you in a moment, at the finish line for the Cornell University rowing course at that time. And this was, as you can see, a really big deal at the time. A big major sport, kind of like hockey is now in Ithaca or football is in the South. And the rowers were a little bit full of themselves, as you can see. They were the elite athletes of the era, and people loved to watch them row, and they loved the races, and they would gather on Fulton Street on the rail cars. And so the reason why I want to show you this is that what became Renwick Park and then Stewart Park was really integral and close by the whole rowing experience. And now I'm going to send this back to Susan to talk a little bit about the boathouse.
So Cascadilla School Boathouse embodies Ithaca's very rich architectural history present in the late 19th century and extant today. The boathouse and its construction coexisted as Renwick Park was being developed and before it became Stewart Park. The building was designed in 1894, starting around 1894, and completed in 1896. So while it coexisted with Renwick Park and its amusements, the boathouse was purposely built as Cascadilla School recreation and rowing facility. It was built in the shingle style for $8,000, which in today's dollars was $245,000, which to me seems pretty cheap. The Cascadilla School, if you could just go to the next slide, Rick.
Sure.
Oh, this is just my favorite photo of the boathouse ever. Again, the elite rowers that Rick just referenced, and standing out on the deck, getting ready to row. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. The Cascadilla School is still in existence. That's the photo that you're seeing on your left. And one can compare their 1890 school building on Summit Ave in College Town with the boathouse, which is on your right. The school building was designed by William Henry Miller, one of the most prolific Tompkins County and Ithaca architects in our history. And the architects who designed the Cascadilla Boathouse were proteges of Miller, Clinton Vivian, and Arthur Gibb of the firm Vivian and Gibb. Their work is evident throughout Tompkins County as well. And for the purposes of this lecture tonight, we didn't have enough time to go into a lot of specifics about them, but maybe another time. So if you could go to the next slide, Rick. In 1923, the boathouse was incorporated into the park, which was fully owned by the City of Ithaca at that time. Currently, it houses the not-for-profit, the Cascadilla Boat Club, whose mission is to introduce, provide access to, and coach sweep, rowing, and sculling. Cascadilla Boathouse is one of the few continuously operating boathouses in the United States, possibly the only one, but we still haven't figured that out yet. And the building is on the National Register of Historic Places. Rick, next one. And I want you to look at this completely politically incorrect language in the Ithaca Journal from 1959. It says disabled Stewart Park veteran may be raised. In March of that year, 1959, the language of urban renewal came to the park, and because the building was in pretty bad shape, the city had owned it, they recommended the city council, the Department of Public Works recommended that the rambling old building be demolished. But that didn't happen, as we all know, and we'll talk more about the future of the boathouse later. So Bryan McCraken is now going to discuss the architecture in the park.
All right, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I want to preface my talk by saying I'm a historian and preservationist, and I tend to talk a lot and get focused on the details. So if I go off on a tangent, I apologize in advance. So where I wanted to start is giving a little bit of background about what's happening in Ithaca at the time Renwick Park was developed. So at the end of the 19th century, Ithaca was booming. There were major employers that were being developed or expanded, like Cornell University, Ithaca Gun, and Morris Chain. The municipality was expanding its resources and its development of the land. They had created or installed an electric light system in the city, a municipal water and sewer system, extended roads, paved them, installed sidewalks. The city was established in 1888, becoming from the village. And, you know, the population grew by about 60% between 1865 and 1880. So this tremendous growth was all in the background of Renwick Park's development. So you had, as part of the growth of Ithaca, next slide, please, the development of the Ithaca Street Railway System, which this is a map from 1934 that shows the extent of the rail lines in the city. Now, it doesn't include the line that went to Stewart Park, or Renwick Park, which I will get to in a minute, but it does give a good idea of how the trolleys transported people around the city, all the way from the tops of the hills down to the flats, from the east end of the city all the way to the west end. Next slide, please. So Renwick Park was part of the trolley car tradition in the United States. So in every major metropolitan area, electric railways were installed into the city to help with transportation. And what many of the owners of this transportation system realized is that ridership was very high during the work week and very low on the weekend. And so to encourage ridership on the weekends, the owners of the rail systems would develop what were called trolley parks. So these were essentially small amusement parks at the end of rail lines that would promote the usage of the trolleys on the weekends. And for Renwick Park, that's exactly what happened. You see a small loop that is right next to the letters that say Renwick Park area in the map. That was the loop, thank you, that brought people to the park. And what you don't see in the map is the pavilion complex that was built. So the owners of Ithaca's rail system were Hand and Bergholz, and they developed Renwick Park on the Renwick Tract, which Susan mentioned earlier. That was an old military tract that was purchased by the Renwick family and owned by them for about 100 years. Bergholz and Hand purchased this lot and used it to develop not only the Trolley Park, but two other major developments in the city at the time. Next slide, please. The first was Lakeview Cemetery. The Renwick tract was rather large, extending all the way from the lake to the east end of the Cayuga Heights neighborhood. And so in addition to the park, they created the Lakeview Cemetery and the Cayuga Heights neighborhood as an elite, using their words, elite suburban neighborhood. Now, to develop the plans for these three major developments in the city, the Trolley Company hired William Webster, a Rochester-based landscape architect, to design all three, or at least the landscape for all three. And so William Webster, who was noted in all of the contemporary literature as being this incredibly prominent and successful landscape architect, there's very little known about his early years. We do know that he was born in England in 1817 and came to America around 1823. He arrived in Rochester shortly, or in 1833, and soon received some pretty prominent commissions, one of the biggest being from William Letchworth of the Letchworth State Park fame. Now, he was hired by Bergholz and Hand to design these three amenities. And if you advance to the next slide, you can see a bit of his work. So Webster was a follower of Frederick Law Olmsted and copied in a lot of ways the design aesthetic that Olmsted mastered in Central Park. So you will see a lot of the elements that were implemented in Central Park implemented here. You have the very formalized planting areas and pathways that are then set within a naturalistic landscape, which was typical of the period. So in this photo, you see very regularized circular pathways, very angular. And then within those planting beds, you see a very naturalized planting. In the background, you see large mature trees that represent the natural environment. And this was all very typical of his design. Next slide, please. And again, you can see the same design aesthetic here. You see the circular planting beds next to Renwick Beach in the foreground. And then in the background, you see the large natural trees and the meadow-like landscape. That was all very typical of his designs. Next slide, please. Bergholz and Hand hired the locally prominent architects, Vivian and Gibb, to design the structures within the park. So as Susan mentioned, Vivian and Gibb were locally well known. Their buildings were constructed throughout Tompkins County, but in Stewart Park, they were hired to design the pavilion complex and some of the smaller buildings that were part of Renwick Park. So here you see their original plan and elevation for the complex, the pavilion complex, and it's very symmetrical in its design. You have two pavilions, one of them the restaurant pavilion and the dance pavilion. Then there is in the center a tall water tower with an observation deck on top. And these three elements were connected by a semicircular colonnade. In the center of that colonnade was the bandstand. Next slide, please. Now, it was an incredibly beautiful design, but I'm sure very expensive to construct. And so you can see in the map, it's a Sanborn fire insurance map from 1914, that not all elements of the Vivian Gibb design were implemented. The two pavilions, the water tower and the bandstand were, along with what is affectionately known as the Tea Pavilion, which you can see in the foreground of the picture at the bottom. But what wasn't connected or what wasn't constructed was the semicircular colonnade that was a pretty central piece of the original design. Next slide, please. The buildings that were constructed, though, were completed in the shingle style. Now, this was an American-grown architectural style that was popular from around 1880 through 1900. It was a largely academic style, so that means it didn't translate into vernacular architecture easily. And so most examples were architect designed people who had formal training in architecture, and some of the precedents that went along with this architectural style. And those were the colonial revival style, which had a focus on early American architecture and classical elements. The Richardsonian Romanesque style, which if you think of a Romanesque church in Europe, you have the big stone structures with barrel arches. And then the Queen Anne style, which again was a very organic, irregularly massed type style with a lot of detail. And in the bottom image, you can see kind of the quintessential elements of a shingle style designed building. Many of them are represented beautifully in the boathouse. You have the towers with the wraparound veranda. You have classical elements in the columns on the veranda. And most importantly, the use of shingles everywhere. The roof was clad in wood shingles. The walls were clad in wood shingle. Everything was wood shingle. Next slide, please. And so some of these elements were translated into the pavilions that were designed by Vivian and Gibb. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is the emphasis on the horizontality of the building. And so here with the pavilions, you can see that there's a low sloped hip roof that was clad in, you guessed it, wood shingles. And there were, classically inspired columns on the wraparound portico. The barrel arches that were important in the Romanesque style are represented in the entrances to the dance pavilion. You also have multi-light windows, which was an element of the Victoria or the Queen Anne style. All of these elements were combined to create beautiful examples of the shingle style along the lake. Next slide, please. And some of these elements were translated into the water tower, which again, not a focus on the horizontality, but more of the tower idea of the Queen Anne style. But you do see some of the other elements of the shingle style. One, the shingle cladding, but two, the classical columns in the rooftop or the observation deck. You have the barrel arches that are also in the observation deck. The Palladian type door entrance, Palladian windows were popular in classical architecture, and they were translated like this for doors. And you have the multi-light windows that are seen on the third story. This image is also interesting because you can see the impact the colonnade would have had on this ensemble. So you have, without the colonnade, a door that on the second floor that goes nowhere, which was a bit dangerous. But if you could imagine that the originally planned colonnade would have connected this door to a rooftop observation area on top of that colonnade that connected the three buildings within the park. Next slide, please. And here, my final slide for this section is the bandstand, which was located in the middle of that pavilion complex. And you can see all of the people that visited and enjoyed the park in its early years. Now, the park was popular very early on, and many improvements were made in the park to continue to increase its popularity. The dance pavilion, there was a stage that was added, and it became one of Ithaca's first vaudeville theaters. A projector was added a few years later, and some of Ithaca's first films were shown in the buildings at Stewart Park. But with the advent of the car in 1899, or its introduction of the car in Ithaca in 1899, Renwick Park started to fall out of favor with the residents, who could now use their automobiles to travel elsewhere for enjoyment. And so by 1915, the park, Renwick Park, was closed to the public. And with that, I am going to pass it on to Diana Riesman, who will talk a little bit more about the park's next chapter. Oh,
Actually,
I'm sorry, Rick. I'm passing it on to Rick.
It's okay. You'll have to wait, Diana. That's what you get for beating me in tennis, which you do regularly. So, and one important element of the playground of the park is also the steamboat connection that it had to a lot of the resorts that were located up on the lake. So this is a popular destination, not only accessible by trolley, but also accessible by steamboat from Glenwood, where the yacht club is, from Sheldrake. There were numerous resorts, and many of them chose to dock in this very long pier, which you can see above. As you know, it's very shallow. We'll see some images of that later. So this long extended pier could accommodate, with some dredging, could accommodate some very large steamboats. So that was another important way to access the park during its heyday. Perhaps an even more dramatic form of transportation is by migrating birds. And I just wanted to shift gears a little bit here and talk about the park as a habitat and just some related interesting history. As many of you know who are even casual birders, we are part of this North Atlantic Flyway, and Stewart Park is an important birding area, which is an Audubon destination designation. And a lot of birders, they love to see winter waterfowl, but they also love in migration time, and the peak is approaching, to go around the Swan Pond near the boathouse area to see migrating warblers and other birds that are moving north in the spring and south in the fall. So it's a rich birding area. There's a lot of interesting habitat, and largely that's because of the vegetation here. If you've been over to Queen Catherine Marsh and Watkins, you can see better what most of the south end of the Finger Lakes were like, where it's a big cattail marsh and some swamp forest areas. And we had a lot of both back in the day, and we have a little bit of the swamp forest, not much, which is in the Renwick Wildwood, thanks to some of our birding heroes and historical characters that I'll tell you about. Most of the cattail marsh has been filled because of canal dredging and also park development. But one of the most notable scientists of Ithaca who started the Lab of Ornithology in 1915 was Arthur Allen, and he was a graduate student at Cornell, and he did his doctoral, got his degree in zoology. There was no ornithology degree at the time, studying the habitat of the red-winged blackbird in the Renwick Marsh. And here he is studying the marsh vegetation. And he was one of the first scientists, it was really before ecology was emerging, but really to study this connection of habitat to birds and to wildlife. So he really was doing cutting edge, even unnamed kind of research at the time. And some of his dissertation was published in 1911 or 12. And this is just a graphic from his dissertation. And you can see Renwick Park is here. The Renwick Wildwood, or the swamp forest, with a lot of silver maples and plane trees and sycamores, other really impressive vegetation. A lot of poison ivy, which is native and a wonderful bird habitat, Virginia creeper, spice bush, and still a lot of it is there. And then a very large marsh in the area that is now the golf course. And over it, where Treeman is located, that was also swampland, cattail marsh. And you can see rail lines that put coal onto this barges that steamboats would then take out to the north to either ports north of the lake or also onto the Erie Canal to go east or west. So there was a lot of really interesting research going on right at this time, which is 1910, 1911, and 1912, while people were partying and being entertained in Renwick Park. He was doing some serious studying in this area. And right around the same time, the Department of Public Works decided they wanted to extend Stewart Park into this kind of untidy forested area to the south, which is now commonly known as the Fuertes Bird Sanctuary, but it really is historically known as the Renwick Wildwood. So in really an early kind of environmental action that took place, a lot of notable scientists and naturalists, including Arthur Allen, Luis Agassiz Fuertes, and James Needham, approached the Department of Public Works to get them to not do this, and they explained the importance of this natural area for habitat and just for nature study. And they convinced the Department of Public Works to kind of leave it forever wild. So it's a very significant development in the park, and this permanent forested land is really a critical part of the park to create that special environment with a lake and the grass-like setting, buffering the highway and the railroad. So it's a really significant moment, and you can see either Arthur Allen or James Needham talking to, they would have many Boy Scout tours. They were very much into environmental education and kind of cutting edge in all of this. Some of you may have seen, if you sort of cross the highway at the high school, go under the highway and under and over the railroad, you can see this gateway that looked like this in 1927, and it was done in honor of Fuertes. And this is what it looked like back in the day. I understand, I don't know if Joanne Cornish is watching, but she told me that the director of planning for the city, that her grandfather actually worked on the concrete for this. And it's still standing today. And even these caps are lying about in the woods. It'd be fun to restore this someday. We worked with the Bird Club. I think one point that I think is really interesting is the Bird Club has had real civic engagement. They've done some significant improvements in the park, and I'll tell you about one next to the boathouse that we've been working with them on. But they funded this in honor of some of their birding heroes and scientists in the community, and they also kindly funded this interpretive panel overlooking the Wildwood on the Waterfront Trail boardwalk, and it kind of tells both a natural history of the Renwick Wildwood back in the day and what the issues are now, and also the story of the Bird Club and how they saved the Wildwood from being converted into a more cultivated park landscape. So now it's Diana's turn to tell us about the Wharton Studio Museum.
It is, and I just want to make the birds and Luis Fuertes. We did a screening of a Wharton film today for a local library council, a movie called The Lottery Man, and I watched the credits at the end. I hadn't looked at the credits in a long time, and Mr. Fuertes had a small part in the movie. He played, he was the one running the lotteries. I just thought that was, I never noticed that before. So anyway, good evening, everyone. I'm so glad to be here to have this opportunity to tell you a bit about the Wharton Studio. The Wharton Studio building, sister to the Picnic Large Pavilion, was a little over 100 years ago home to a bustling motion picture production company, Wharton Inc. Studios. This image, taken from Cayuga Lake circa 1915, gives one a sense of the expansiveness of the Wharton Studio. Today, the building is one of only a handful of silent motion picture production studios still in existence in the country. It's an important artifact. You can go to the next slide, Rick. It's an important artifact from time when filmmaking was both an emerging art form and industry. And we are fortunate to have it in our midst on the shores of the lake in Ithaca's main historic waterfront park. So how did the Wharton Studio come to be located in a lovely centrally isolated Ithaca? Well, in 1912, an enterprising filmmaker named Theodore Wharton came to town on assignment from the Chicago-based S&A Film Company. He was sent here to shoot scenes of typical college life at Cornell. Next slide, Rick. Here are some scenes of typical college life at Cornell. And this included a Cornell-Penn State football game played on a field where Wharton Middle School now stands. Ted Wharton was apparently struck by the diversity of the student body at the time, as well as by the landscapes of Cornell's campus with its gorges and waterfalls and open expanses of land. And once he completed his assignment, Wharton left Ithaca, but the town and its abounding natural beauty and its lovely melding of the rustic and the urban, which still attracts people today, that stuck in his mind. And a couple of years later, he returned, leased 50 acres of Renwick Park, now Stewart Park, and with his brother Leopold, established Wharton Inc. Studios. The Wharton Studio building, currently a City Department of Public Works maintenance and storage facility, served as the filmmaker's main production space. Because the films at this time, next slide, Rick, because the films at this time were silent, there was no need for anyone to be yelling quiet on the set. And so multiple scenes from different productions were often being shot at the same time in the production space. Here you have Leopold Wharton directing Jean Southern in the top, and a sort of similar scene working below. And you can see in the background of the top picture that there's another scene being shot maybe from a completely different film. So it appears also that the Whartons had an office in the tower that Bryan was talking about. It's located between the Wharton studio building and its sister pavilion, and that must have afforded the Whartons some incredible views of the lake. So the Whartons produced films of all kinds of genres, dramas, comedies, World War I, propaganda films, and they attracted some of the best known actors of the day to Ithaca. Next slide. People like Irene Castle. Next slide. And here, sitting on a break, I love this picture, and that sign above them are Creighton Hale, Pearl White, and Lionel Barrymore. And as some of you might know, Lionel Barrymore is the grand uncle of the actress Drew Barrymore. The Barrymores were a very prominent theater and film family. Also, people like Warner Oland worked for the Wharton studio. And in this picture, a young Oliver Hardy, he's in the background leaning, his right arm is leaning exactly on the plane. And he starred in a few episodes of a Wharton serial called The New Adventures of J. Rufus Wallingford. I think Mr. Hardy was probably about 22, 23 at this time. So the Wharton studio was best known for its popular serials, episodic films that brought audiences back week after week to the theaters in downtown Ithaca. There were at least 7 beautiful theaters in downtown Ithaca at this time, and people came back week after week to find out what happened to their favorite heroines, such as Elaine in The Romance of Elaine, Beatrice in Beatrice Fairfax, or Patria Channing, played by Irene Castle, in the popular series Patria. One serial called The Mysteries of Myra even dabbled in themes related to the occult. So next slide, please. The Whartons used every inch of the park. And they also shot on Cornell's campus, and they shot downtown. So they were able to shoot scenes taking place in sort of stands of trees, or they could shoot a more urban scene downtown. They really used the city and the park as dramatic backgrounds and backdrops for all their films and serials. This is The Eagle's Eye, as you can see, 1918. Next slide. They also built elaborate, I think we may have passed that, that image. They built elaborate outdoor sets as well that were really, really beautiful. And they built those all through the park. And young actresses were occasionally tossed into the icy waters of Cayuga Lake if a storyline demanded it. And apparently Pearl White once had to be revived with copious amounts of alcohol after one such scene. So I think that's actually Pearl White in the boat. So the Whartons, like their counterparts across the country, were pioneers in this relatively new and burgeoning industry and art form. They made things up as they went along because they had to. On a technical level, they created special effects in the camera. They made a ghost appear. Actually, I'm going to ask you to go back, Rick. Oh. They made a ghost appear in the Great White Trail. And this is one of the most beautiful photographs from the era. So here you have production designers and set builders building these miniatures. And you have the gentleman in the back in the white overalls is a very well-known production designer named Arch Chadwick, who went on to teach at Ithaca College. And here, so they built these beautiful miniatures and used them in a scene in Patria, which was a World War I propaganda serial, and they wanted to simulate a war-torn town in Europe. So go to the next slide. So what they did was they put explosives all around the miniatures and then lit them and blew them up to simulate this scene. So it was incredibly clever. Then next slide. And here's another example of them working on some sort of special effects. They did a lot of their special effects in the camera, and there really was not much precedent, so they were incredibly inventive in what they were doing. They were also the Whartons, Ted and his brother Leo. They were also inventing themselves as entrepreneurs, as businessmen, producing and also distributing their films across the country, to Canada, and throughout the world. So the Whartons embraced Ithaca, and the city embraced them back. The studio employed scores of Ithacans and folks from outside of the city as cinematographers, costumers, production designers, set builders, and extras. In the 19-teens, the Ithaca Journal was chock full of stories detailing the comings and goings of the stars and their entourages, as well as advertising daily what film was showing in what theater. Movies in this era were typically accompanied by live music, someone playing a piano or an organ in the theater. And while the Whartons invited Ithacans to come down to Renwick Park to watch movies being made, so many people showed up that the Whartons had to rescind the invitation, saying that the crowds were impeding their work. So by 1918, there were unfortunately signs of financial troubles for the filmmaking brothers, in part due to the influenza epidemic, which obviously put an end to the public going to movie theaters to watch their films. And perhaps some of the Whartons' problems were just due to some bad business decisions, or perhaps Theodore and Leopold grew weary of the cold winters, during which shooting must have been so challenging. I try to imagine what it must have been like to shoot films outside in the cold. So the studio shut down in 1919. And while Ted Wharton briefly opened up shop in a building down on West State Street, that venture did not last. Grossman Pictures, you can go to the next slide. Grossman Pictures took over the studio space in Renwick Park and produced a series called The $1 Million Reward. And this is a still from that series. And so it looks a lot like sort of Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times in a way. But what you notice, if you look at the top of the picture, are the tracks in the ceiling. And those tracks still exist today. They too are a wonderful artifact from this era. You can see them in that more recent picture here. And it's important that we preserve and keep those tracks in the ceiling. And next slide. And not long after, a state-owned organization called Cayuga Pictures moved into the Renwick Park space and produced one film with the lovely title, If Women Only Knew. So by 1921, all filmmaking in Ithaca pretty much ceased. Ted Wharton moved to Santa Cruz, and his brother moved to Texas. It appears they were kind of estranged by that point and they never worked together again. So while this may sound like a sad note to end on, it really isn't. The Wharton Studios' success, though short-lived, was impressive and exciting. The prolific brothers produced hundreds and hundreds of popular silent films seen around the world, starring some of the most famous actors of the era. And at the heart of my organization's mission, of Wharton Studio Museum's mission, is preserving and celebrating this unique, important history. And we do that through screenings of Wharton Studio films. It's fortunate that some of those films do still exist, as well as through multimedia exhibits and presentations, which we hope broaden awareness of this history. But it really is the building by the shores of beautiful Cayuga Lake in Stewart Park that is so special and significant. It's a wonderful and important, tangible reminder that the Whartons put Ithaca on the map as a vibrant center of early American movie making. So it's just incredible that this building is still standing today, and Wharton Studio Museum is thrilled to be working in partnership with Friends of Stewart Park, Historic Ithaca, and of course the City of Ithaca to ensure this building and its storied past is celebrated and lives on.
Okay, I'm going to start this and then you'll pick up, Brian. Is that, I think that's the plan here. We are now celebrating the centennial of the park, as it was founded on July 4th, 1921. And it's, and the mayor, who you see there on the left of your screen, did donate money for many causes. He died before July 4th, apparently about 3 weeks before the opening of the park. And he donated, ended up about $150,000 for park maintenance, the purchase and the upkeep of the park, just to make it kind of presentable for this wonderful park opening that occurred. So there's and it's interesting to know that it's not, they opened it on the 100th birthday of the founding of Ithaca, the village. So even way back then, they were thinking about, you know, this idea of anniversaries and celebrations. But it was you know, that this was a movement nationally at this time as well, the public park movement. A lot of park development was occurring at the time. And I think it was important to provide amenities for public amenities for citizens of a community. And now I'd like to introduce a short commercial break and introduce Andrea Bruns, who is our fundraising coordinator. Andrea, you there?
All right. Hi, everyone. As Rick just said, before Stewart Park opened, Mayor Stewart made a $150,000 gift to prepare the park to serve the public. And 100 years later, we're right on the precipice of Stewart Park's centennial, and Stewart Park is still a beloved local destination. So we've had 100 years of wear and tear, and our park still needs similar preparation to thrive during its second century. As a historic park, Stewart Park needs more restoration, it needs more preservation, and it needs some more modernization in some areas. So this is where I want to ask you to think of all those wonderful memories of Stewart Park and then to get involved. To help the park thrive as it enters its second century, Friends of Stewart Park is leading a grassroots level effort to restore Mayor Stewart's $150,000 gift. So this is a community-wide effort, and it can only succeed through widespread participation. Here's what we're going to do. Together, 1,500 families and people, you, your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, can work together to restore Mayor Stewart's $150,000 gift by each making a $100 gift. Right now, it's really exciting. Momentum is growing, and we have 59 community members currently who have joined the Centennial Challenge. And we're excited to watch the challenge support grow from here. So I want to ask you to join this community-wide effort to support the future of Stewart Park. You can become part of the challenge by visiting the link that you see at the top here, www.stewartpark.org/challenge. And I'll put the link in the chat if someone hasn't already. You can also join by calling the Friends of Stewart Park office phone, and I will be at the phone for the next hour or so. That number I'll also drop in the chat, and that is 607-319-4766. And I really hope that you will become part of this 1,500 person support group for Friends of Stewart Park, kind of in honor of its 100th birthday and to prepare it to serve the Ithaca community for the next 100 years. That's it from me.
Thank you, Andrea. Nice job. So I want to just get back into the some of the work of the Bird Club very briefly. They also, in 1927, developed there was a cattail marsh in front of the boathouse, and they decided they wanted to create a waterfowl viewing area. So they left some marsh on the lakeside up here, and they created an open water pond, and they put decoys in, and they basically used it to attract waterfowl and provide a place for viewing. And it's a beautiful setting. And then in 1934, apparently members visited the Chicago Botanic Garden and thought they saw an overlook that they thought would be beautiful. So they built this, the Fuertes stone overlook, and we worked on this. Well, I guess I'll maybe show you that later, but we did work on the restoration of that during the past 3 years, and we think it's a beautiful, now that the boathouse is going to be restored, we also want to do a little more work on this area as well. Now, Bryan, you're going to tell us a little bit about the park in the 20s.
Right. So I am back to tell you a little bit about the physical development of the park after it became a city park in 1921. So as you might have remembered, the original entrance to the park was by trolley, and the trolleys would drop off pedestrians at the pavilion complex. And that was your first experience with Renwick Park. With the advent of the automobile, the entrance into the park needed to change to accommodate automotive traffic. And so a new entrance to the park was installed in the southern part of the perimeter, and a circulation road was installed along the perimeter of the park to direct automotive traffic. The second major improvement to the park after it was acquired by the city was to address the flooding issue. So being located next to Fall Creek and Cayuga Lake, the area was prone to flooding every year. And to address this, the city embarked on an ambitious project to raise the level of the park by 2 to 3 feet. So fill was brought in and to level the area and raise it so that it would not flood every spring. Now, the two things to keep in mind with this project is that it continued the focus on the automobile. And, you know, as the fill was brought in, they made a conscious effort to preserve the automotive traffic patterns in the park and the roads that were designed very early on. The second piece is that the landscape architect designed features of the park that survived the Renwick Park era, the Wharton studio era, the remnants of that architect designed landscape were lost when the fill was brought in. Now you will note that there are little circles in the aerial view that you see here from 1927. Those were rings that were placed around some of the major trees in the park to protect them from the infill, which is something interesting, but really those are the only remnants from the Webster designed landscape in the park. Next slide, please. And here is a master plan that was done by Hewitt and Metzger, a local landscape architecture firm in 1934. Now, after the city implemented many changes in the park in the 1920s, they realized that perhaps maybe we should do a little bit better at planning the amenities in the park. So there was an effort in the mid-20s to do some planning for the park, but really there was no teeth, and the plans didn't really gain traction. What happened in 1934 is that the city engineer hired this firm to design a comprehensive plan for the park, and it's 4 main elements. So first, the park proper, which you see at the top of the image. That's where the park pavilion complex is. That's where the original Renwick Park is. The boathouse, which is farther to the left of the image. The second piece is the bird sanctuary, which Rick mentioned earlier. That became a part of the park. The third piece is the municipal golf course that is down at the lower left-hand side of the screen. And then finally, off the screen is the planned municipal airfield that is now in the area that's Cass Park and the Hangar Theater and the Treeman Marina. In the image, you can see many of the elements that are in the park today. Again, the boathouse is there, the Fuertes Overlook. You have many of the broad boulevard, well, some of the boulevards that were planned, others were not implemented. The pavilion complex is still there for the most part. A flagpole, which I'll get to in a minute, the lagoon. But other elements that were major features of this park plan were never implemented. Some of the main transportation connections for all 4 of the parks were never executed. Next slide, please. This is an image from 1934, and you can see many of the elements that I just talked about in the 1934 plan. You see the pavilion complex, and you see both the vehicle circulation paths as well as the pedestrian paths. One of the most important that you'll see in the foreground at the image at the bottom is the flagpole and the circular walk around it. I'm sorry, my son just joined us. So you also see the boathouse and some of the other landscape features. Next slide, please. So one moment, please. Can you go find mommy? Please go find mommy. My apologies. The image that you see is a restored Stewart. Excuse me, Everett. My apologies. So the image that you see is a restored Mayor Stewart Memorial Flagpole that was installed by the city in 1927 to commemorate Mayor Stewart's gift of $150,000 to the maintenance and improvement of Stewart Park. It became a central focus of the park and its landscape once it was installed. You remember seeing the circular path and the radiating paths from the pavilion complex that were installed to connect this element to the main park pavilion complex. Next, thank you. Next slide, please. And finally, one of the other critical elements of that four-piece Stewart Park plan was the municipal golf course, which was built on land that was a gift to the city from Mayor Newman in 1906. So the interesting thing about that is Newman purchased this land from the Renwick family. One moment, please, buddy. Purchased the land in 1906, and he became mayor in 1907 and 1908, which I think is an interesting coincidence. But the land that was purchased was originally used by the city as a municipal dump and ash heap. So basically all of the waste for the city was brought to this location and dumped there. If it wasn't the dump, it was largely marshland. So the area that became Newman Golf Course was transformed in 1934 as part of a New Deal Civilian Works Administration program. Basically, the Civilian Works program was a New Deal program that created manual labor jobs for out-of-work people in the winter of 1933 and 1934. So these crews were brought in to dredge and straighten Fall Creek, and the spoils from that work were used to level and fill the golf course and create the 9 holes and 9 greens, as well as the circulation road that went around the Newman Golf Course. And with that, I'm going to hand it off.
Well, I think we're going to shorten this up a bit and sort of skip through a few slides very quickly and then get to an exciting project. We have a menu of revitalization projects we've done, but we're not going to, I'll skip through those quickly and get to some great news about the boathouse that Susan will tell you about. But I'll just run through a few things. I mean, as you know, swimming was a huge part of the culture in the years between 1940s and 1980. Although swimming ended in the early 1960s because there were a couple of drownings, and the water is, it's not that it's necessarily polluted, but it's very turbid due to the sediment. And it's really difficult to protect. In the bottom, as you can see, it's very shallow for thousands of yards going out. So it's just a difficult space to both guard and protect the safety of the users. And it's really not permittable anymore. Some areas like in Watkins are grandfathered in. We were commenting as we prepared this talk how fortunate we are to have so much beautiful photography from the early period of the park, and there's a few lovely pictures from this era. But in general, once we get into the 40s and 50s, it becomes more of a Polaroid era, and the quality sort of degenerates pretty quickly. So I'm just going to go through these quickly. Skating in the lagoon, of course, the carousel, which was donated by the Park family in the 1950s. There was music. My friend Kit Lambert, who many of you probably know, who passed away, organized a series of concerts in the park in the 60s and 70s. There was a moment of really looking carefully, and those of you that were around in the 80s might remember there was a lot of drama around Stewart Park design. There was a Citizens to Save Stewart Park. It was a very interesting moment. I was just starting to work with Trowbridge Trowbridge at the time, and they were going through this master plan creation. The public decided they simply wanted it, they really liked it the way that it was, and they wanted to, instead of doing a rather elaborate design, to do just identify preservation goals and guidelines. And at that time, a Parks Commission was formed, which has been an important contributor to kind of stewarding the park over the years. And then there were waterfront plans in the 90s, which in part led to the creation of the waterfront trail, and then brought on some of our work in creating the Friends of Stewart Park. One of the recommendations of this plan in 2009 was to create a Friends, excuse me, a Friends organization, sort of like a mini Central Park Conservancy or Prospect Park Alliance, or many other nonprofits that you see throughout the country that are helping municipalities to take care of their historic park resources. So I'm going to skip through a lot of our work that we're so proud of, particularly the playground, in the interest of time. We have done a lot of work on the picnic pavilion, as you know, and it kind of relates to the topic tonight. I think we've really done a lot of restoration work that's supported by Tompkins County tourism program and many individuals in the community. Tim Merrick did wonderful work. And we are planning actively the Wharton Studio Museum. We're finalizing designs for this summer. Taking sort of the northern bay and converting it to a small cafe and gallery space. And Susan Holland is going to wrap it up. We'll have a couple of announcements afterwards and tell you a little bit about the boathouse to close out the history section.
Great. Thank you, Rick. And thanks to the Friends of Stewart Park and the Wharton Studio Museum and the public and our government agencies for really working on this park all together. It's a really important piece of our history, and couldn't be more excited about all the projects that are going on. And if any of you work with Rick and Diana, you know that they push us all a little bit. It's good, and it's good energy to get us to do some stuff. So that were out there before we'll get to the news about the boathouse. This report that you see on the left was completed in 2000 by Barrow Architecture. The city started to get serious about putting some restoration plans together, and this report still stands. Actually, we still use it. And as it was being written, stabilization work was being begun in 1997. And then throughout the 2000s. Kingsbury Architecture in early 2016 finished a buildings condition report for all the park buildings, and which really set the stage for restoration work. And one of the first pieces that was done on the boathouse was roof stabilization in 2017. Rick, could you go to the next slide? And there's the roof being replaced in 2017, which is always a great step in historic preservation so that you can kind of shore up the envelope, no pun intended there, to make sure that it doesn't leak, and because water is just an enemy of buildings traditionally. Next slide. Great. So back to the one before that, Rick, if you would. So in 2018, Historic Ithaca, the Friends of Stewart Park, Wharton Studio Museum, and the City of Ithaca, we decided to put our heads together, take the Kingsbury Architecture report, and we're garnered a grant, and I'll talk about that in a second, but the exterior restoration of the boathouse, significant exterior restoration will be happening this year. The city, Barrow Architecture, who came back and is our architect of record for this project in 2021, and Historic Ithaca, we're working together to announce the general contractors, will be announced very shortly. And the bids for the restoration work were opened on March 23rd. So we're just about a week away from opening those. That information is public, but we will be making that announcement. And so the exterior work is from a grant that we were able to get. from an Environmental Protection Fund grant of $367,172 from the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, and has been really in motion since early 2019. 2020 was a hard year to get it done, but we were able to put the architect together then and pick an architect. And as we said, barrow architecture. And so we'll have repairs to the wood shingle siding, veranda, the west elevation foundation, decking, windows and doors, and creating an accessible restroom entrance. And we'll be, of course, working with Cascadilla Boat Club that still rows, and they start their season shortly. So we are all in conversation about making it the best possible project for the city, for the boat club, and for the park. Thank you. Rick?
Andrea?
Sorry, I was away just checking progress on this actually. So it's exciting. Thank you. Within the last 15 minutes, we have had 10 new donations to the Centennial Challenge. So that's really exciting. Thank you everyone for participating and getting involved in that. Here's a little list to show some of the community participation that's already occurred. And we really hope that you'll consider joining the Centennial Challenge and helping us continue to move into this second century and to create a more beautiful, a more modernized park that is able to really serve the Ithaca community and to continue creating history in a place that is so historically rich. Again, I will put the link in the chat. We'll also send it in a follow-up email. And again, you can also call the office and I will put the number there and I will be available for the next probably half an hour to take any calls that you would like to make.
Thank you, Andrea. And thank you to everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. As we mentioned before, this is one of many Centennial events that Friends of Stewart Park has on tap for this special celebration for this year. You can learn more about all of the events that we're planning at our website, friendsofstewartpark.org or stewartpark.org. We own both of them. And we are planning some safe in-person summer events, which are really exciting. And also we're going to be having more virtual events coming up. A reminder that our next one is the Boys and Girls in the Boat coming up at the end of April. And you can register for that now. The link is on our website in the events area. It's easy to find. And I would like to thank our presenters, Rick, Diana, Susan, Brian, and a big thank you to Natasha for her work. And thank you to our Centennial sponsors again, Tompkins Trust Company, Hancock Esterbrook LLP, and La Terrell. They make these events possible. If you would like to learn more about becoming a Centennial sponsor, you can email info@friendsofstewartpark.org, or you can call the phone number that Andrea has been putting in the chat. Both of those ways are great. I'd like to tell everybody to have a great night. And then also, Rick, we have had a special request for people who want to hang out. People are wondering if you can go back and show those pictures that you skipped really fast over with the zoo and the other things, kind of the 1940s through the 1980s. Sure. You could do that for like 5 minutes after the thing. That would be great. And
just for those who aren't going to stay, we will definitely show those at the meeting, the public meeting on the revitalization plan update on the 26th. That'll be really about the work that we've all done together in the park and what we want to hear from you about what's important to you about continuing the park revitalization. So we will show them again, but I'm happy to go through them tonight. That'd be great.
Great, thanks.
Do we have any time? Do we have any time for questions or no?
Sure.
Because there's a couple coming in that I can see.
Yeah. We've been answering a lot of them as they come.
Oh, okay, Janelle, great, wonderful.
I will continue to do that in the chat as I know how to answer them, and Rick can kind of go back to the pictures.
Great.
Yeah, and if there's any you wanted to direct to a speaker, we could certainly accommodate that.
Okay. think you went back a little too far, yeah.
Did I go too far? Okay, yeah, here we go. Sorry.
No, that was where
No.
they wanted to see those pictures from the 40s and up.
Oh, got you. Okay, right. Well, okay, so from here.
There you go.
So this is just a lovely shot of swimming in the park, and you can see the slides way out in the water. Sometimes you can see lifeguard stands that are way out there too. I don't know, all reports are that the bottom was kind of disgusting to walk in, and kids loved it, adults less so, lifeguards probably not at all. But it's an important part of the culture and the history of the park, and it's probably the main question that we get asked about is, will there ever be swimming there again? I don't think there will be. It would require constant dredging, and the environmental impacts are significant. The area wants to be a cattail marsh, and fighting nature like this would be very difficult to do. And I think what we're hoping is to build a beautiful new splash pad that's more functional and more fun. I think, who's the photographer? Is it Saul Steinberg?
Yeah, Saul Steinberg.
Yeah, I think this is one of his pictures
Great.
of the lifeguard. I really have seen very few images of the train, so this is fun. That I think you found these, Janelle. I've never seen a map of where it was located, but I'd be very curious. Before I came to Ithaca, I was in Austin, Texas, and there's still a beautiful train there in Zilker Park that is very popular. It's not really part of our plans, but could be, I guess. There's a public outcry. Skating obviously was a big thing. This is the lagoon on the south end of the park. We'd love to see it. I'm not sure that we're making it easy for Mother Nature to provide this for us anymore, but we could have done this maybe 2 weeks ago, though, or a month ago for a couple of weeks. As I said, the carousel was brought into the park in the 1950s, and I'll show you some of the restoration work that we've done on it in a little while. We looked a little bit at some entertainment that happened in the park, and there's, of course, always been a history of this. Many of you remember the Ithaca Festival in Stewart Park in the 90s. So just a few projects. I guess I'll just do this since you've asked. The Waterfront Trail has been a transformative project in the park, brought in a whole new group of year-round users, and I think it's just been it's a real new focal point of the park. Bryan showed a picture of this before it was planted, but we have worked very hard. We had 5 mayors involved in helping us do this over the years, and raised money for this before the Friends of Stewart Park was formed back in the late 2009 or so, through the Chamber Foundation. And we're still working with the Ithaca Garden Club on this to keep it beautiful and keep replanting it as needed. One big project that the city did, we certainly encouraged them to do it greatly, but the Tea Pavilion was condemned. It was moved. It was located behind the water tower back in the Renwick Park era, but it moved to its current location in the 30s, and but it was condemned about 10 years ago, and the city did a beautiful job restoring it. Claudia Brenner, Bert Fortner worked on the design. It's sort of back to its traditional elevation. Here it was flat on the ground. They raised it again like it had been, but added accessible ramps and did a fine job. The city crews built it themselves. The park entry makes me happy every time I go in, unless it's weedy, which it usually isn't now. It seemed to be a stable planting, and I think this also was a Ithaca Garden Club design. Beverly Hillman has helped with us. Community beautification helps us to maintain it. Diana has led the effort to put interpretive panels on all the buildings, and we think that information about the park is really important and informative. And there's 4 signs on the 4 significant park buildings: the picnic pavilion, the dance pavilion, or the Wharton Stewart Museum, the boathouse, and also the tea pavilion. And we've done our interpretive panel here of overlooking the Renwick Wildwood from the Waterfront Trail boardwalk. I told you a little bit about the restoration effort. We raised about $17,000 to restore the stonework in the park. And do some planting. We have discovered that there is a gaping hole in the foundation, and when the lake level drops, it became exposed after this work was done. So it's something that we are trying to now raise money to address that. And then the splash pad, the charming 70-year-old splash pad that we, despite its rustic charm, we think it's time for something that is a little more modern, fun, engaging, maybe doesn't run all day, every day, and wastes water. And currently the water drains into the lagoon, which is not really allowed under current stormwater regulations.
Rick, speaking of the splash pad, we have a question in the question and answer that you might be able to answer live while you're talking.
Sure.
Related to bathrooms, asking about them.
Yeah, so we are starting next week. Diana and the Wharton Studio Museum and Friends of Stewart Park have led the effort to raise the funding to renovate the bathrooms in the Wharton Studio Museum as the first phase of the museum and park center, and to make them into winter bathrooms. So we will next winter have year-round bathrooms. It'll take us a couple of months to renovate them. So there will be temporary porta potties in the park for the months of April and May. And apologies in advance for that, but it will be well worth it. We're very excited about it, and we've worked really hard to make that happen. We also want to do bathrooms. I can show you pictures of where we would like to do them. Here's some of the existing playground equipment, some of which we'd like to stay, and some of it we really would like to see go because it's not safe and not up to code, and we don't think fits the kind of landscape character and the historic character of the park. So these are the first two phases that we've built. This is this proposed splash pad with the Finger Lakes pattern in it. And then this is the proposed bathrooms, which were going to be winter bathrooms. Now they're going to be seasonal accessible bathrooms. And we'll be fundraising for this over the next year or two for sure. It's about a $500,000 project to do the splash pad in the bathrooms. And they're kind of tied together from a plumbing and water control perspective.
Rick, the bathrooms at the boathouse are also getting a little bit of a refurbishment, but more about the accessible access to those bathrooms as well, with new landscaping and new ways to get into those when they're open. So
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
I just want to mention, I don't know if Rick mentioned this already, but in the playground, we really tried to incorporate elements of the playground that relate to the park's history. So you can see the Ithaca Street Railway, that's the trolley, and there's a steamboat. And now the little playhouse is called the Wharton Studio. So when we have lovely little interpretive signage on each of the playground features with a black and white photograph, archival photograph of what, inspired of the trolley and of the steamboat, etc. So we really feel like, as Rick mentioned, through this kind of like signage and all that, that we engage people and let them know about the history, and that they see that the park is sort of cared for, and we just hope to engage people that way.
And this is the that first phase was a stick built, we worked with Play by Design, and it was kind of a Leathers style community build. We had 900 people in the fall of 2017. This is a more traditional but incredibly accessible structure that is really wonderful, will last forever, or for a very long time. And we're very proud of both of these phases and excited to finish the playground. And the theme, there is new surfacing too that's been woven throughout these two separate projects. And And the theme of inclusivity or accessibility has really been the driving force behind this, because playgrounds can be the old model of playground with these structures set in lawn. While it might have some charm, it's very difficult for families with any mobility challenges, whether it's the kids or the parents, to be able to work and play with their kids together. So I think the inclusive theme is a larger theme in the park. We think it's a welcoming place for all, and we certainly wanted to address the issue of mobility challenges in playgrounds, which can be very, very frustrating for parents with kids with challenges. So, and then the splash pad will be really fun when it's done. We're just really excited about this. Do you want to talk about this, Diana?
About the carousel? Sure. So the carousel, it's a Herschel carousel from Towanda, New York, and it was installed in approximately 1951. It was a gift from a member of the Park family, and it's just a lovely carousel. Until a few years ago, it was surrounded by a very unattractive and uninviting fence, chain link fence. So after we restored the carousel, all the horses were repainted, at different parts of the carousel were repainted. I think that was about 2014, 2015. We decided that the next important step was a new fence. And so we have this very nice black metal fence around the carousel. And we also made the carousel accessible by retrofitting one of the carriages or chariots, so that, as you can see in the bottom picture on the right, the door opens and a wheelchair can easily maneuver in there and attach, and someone can ride next to the person in the wheelchair. And it's just wonderful to have seen children riding the carousel who previously could not. And we also built that ramp that you see, an accessible ramp for anyone with any kind of mobility issues. And now, if you go to the park, you pretty much notice this the moment you drive in. We have a new carousel cover. As I mentioned, the carousel is over 60, it's like 70 years old, and due to winters, it's been taken down every winter, and that causes great wear and tear on the horses. So the city very much wanted to have a cover that would enable the carousel to stay in place year round. So we have this new cover that was installed last summer, and depending on what happens with the pandemic, we hope that the carousel can go back in as soon as possible.
Yeah, they're planning to put it in to be open by July 4th. So.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about the picnic pavilion, so I'll just move through that. But go have a look if you haven't. The yellow color that you see here is gone, and it's a beautiful off-white.
There's new lighting.
So this is where the new bathrooms will be. I didn't include the simulation, but of that. But you can see the cafe will be located here someday, and there'll be a terrace overlooking the lake and folding doors to allow people to go out onto the terrace from the inside. So we're very excited about this. It's going to be a big fundraising challenge for us, but we will be successful someday, hopefully within 2 years.
So what was so interesting was the area, the picnic pavilion, and the space between it, the plaza, which is really just a parking lot at the moment. This whole area was really the social and cultural hub of the park. And as you saw in those pictures of the band shell, thousands of people came in the summer to hear live music, and there was dancing and all this. And we really want to now, with the picnic pavilion restored, and in typical summers, it is rented every single day of the summer. We really want this to again be the sort of cultural recreational hub of the park. It's an important sort of section, important historic section of the park.
Okay, that's what we've got. So if you are interested in these revitalization issues, come back in, well, you'll be invited to come back in May and to have some input. We'll be offering a survey at that time. We'll ask some questions during the presentation, but there'll also be a more formal survey that will begin at that meeting. And we'd love to hear what you think is important in the park. So Janelle, do you want to wrap it up for us, or have you already done that? I think you've already done that.
I'll just say thank you to everyone for hanging in there. We still have 89 attendees on, and probably some of those people have 2 or 3 people in their room with them. So that's awesome. I'm so glad that you care as much about Stewart Park as we do. Thanks. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
A
you.
quick note, apologies to anyone who scanned the QR code that was on the Centennial Challenge page. It became outdated sometime recently, and I just got an email saying that 10 people had tried to scan it. So if you were trying to donate to the Centennial Challenge, again, we will send out the link in a follow-up email tomorrow, and you can follow that and make a gift online.
Or you can just go to our website at stewartpark.org.
There's the other one.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.